everyone can see. I just want to welcome you to Minnesota's first conference on family violence. I'm Rich Gehrman, and I'm the executive director and the founder of Safe Passage for Children of Minnesota. And if you don't know us, we are an advocacy group in the child welfare arena, meaning broadly child protection and foster care. So among other work we do, we try to help people keep up to date on child welfare and related issues through a weekly blog and frequent podcasts and biweekly webinars. So if that could be helpful to you in your work, I invite you to just go to our website and sign up for the blog and the podcast or register for a webinar. So let me just share with you why we decided to host this event today. We first learned about the concept of family violence from a presentation by our keynote speaker, Andrew Campbell, which led us to the work of other people, including Phil Arco and the National Link Coalition, Ann Olson at the Animal Folks program, and eventually to the program at Anna Marie's Alliance in St. Cloud, among other connections. So when we asked Andrew to speak at our annual fundraiser yesterday, we thought this would be a good opportunity to invite a few more people and have a discussion about this topic. Family violence is often described as the interrelationships among child maltreatment, animal abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse. And I would say it means simply that if one member of the family is being harmed, the others are almost certainly being harmed as well. So this is being brought home to us at Safe Passage very forcefully right now by a study that we're currently doing on child deaths from maltreatment in Minnesota since 2014. We expect to release a report on this before the year, and I'm confident that if you read just the executive summary and a case study or two, you will be stunned. You will be just incredulous at the types of situations that we routinely are leaving children in today. And this is part, if you're in the field, you know, this is part of a 25-year trend in child protection and foster care to focus almost exclusively on family preservation at the expense of the safety and well-being of the child. And domestic violence was present in nearly 30% of these murders, including at least 7 children who were killed during a domestic assault. And these situations almost certainly included animal abuse as well, although court records don't track that dimension of families. So what became so clear from many of these child murders is that if any of the programs and institutions involved with these families had worked together more closely and acted earlier, the life of the child, and in some cases the mother as well, would have been spared. So this suggests to us that it would make good sense for all of us to work more closely together than we traditionally have. But we all also know that working across disciplines is like easy to say and hard to do, because we each have our own legal framework, our body of knowledge, data requirements, funding sources, all of those things that pressure us to really just focus in on our own work. But as I think today's presentations will show, the potential is there to get better and better outcomes for our own clients by working more closely with each other. So we hope today that we will start some conversations that maybe lead to concrete steps such as referral mechanisms, shared protocols, shared training, that will eventually allow all of us to do a better job of advocating for our individual particular clients. So with that overview of the conference, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Andrew Campbell. As I said yesterday, several years ago, I started getting emails from colleagues around the country saying that, hey, you had got to check out this guy, Andrew Campbell. You know, so I did. And what I found was someone who, among many other things, has developed some unique ways to use data and who promotes cooperation across disciplines. So along the way, he's become widely published academically and also personally in his new book, Not Without My Pet, in which he brings to what life is like when you live in a violent family. Every year, Andrew is invited to speak to thousands of people at dozens of events, both in the United States and internationally. And today he is here with us. So welcome, Andrew, and take it away.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you, Stephanie, and everyone with Safe Passage. And thank you to all of you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm truly grateful for each and every opportunity to talk about these things. Again, they're not necessarily a fun subject matter to discuss. It's an important one. And so again, I appreciate every opportunity. As Rich says, a lot of my work focuses on the idea of family violence. Again, the idea being that if one is harmed in the home, all are affected by it. And so you'll hear that come through in today's discussion. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to do my best to keep us on time today. So this session is supposed to end there at 10 a.m. So my plan for this presentation is to stop with about 20 minutes prior to that, about 9:40 or so. And I will see if there's any questions. And then based on that, I will continue. You'll see me skip a few slides today, but I'll note that my full slide deck is available if you'd like me to email that to you. As I said, I'm just going to do my best to keep us on time. There's so much to talk about it in this topic. I was presenting on it in Amarillo, Texas here recently for 6 hours. So even with an hour, it's hard to cover it all. So I'll do my best though. But again, you'll see me skip slides, and that's my reason for doing so. As Rich mentioned, I write often. You can see a picture of my son there. I'm reading a article I wrote for the Animal Welfare Institute. He's a little young to read it, but he loves to look at the pictures. The page after my article actually had a picture of a monkey. He really wanted to meet that monkey. So while he in this image looks excited about my article, as soon as he saw that monkey, he kind of forgot my article, and he was very confused about why I couldn't introduce him to that monkey. He didn't understand why I didn't know it since it was included in the publication I had wrote. So that took some explaining to do, or I had some explaining to do there, but we got through that. I speak often at trainings about, I think this year I'm going to end up giving about 43 or 45. It's usually about what I do every year. As I said, I was just recently in Amarillo. I gave 2 6-hour trainings there, so spoke for about 12 hours on these topics. And while I was there, I was told I had to see Cadillac Ranch, and I wondered what it would look like. And when I got there, it was literally Cadillacs buried in the ground. So they're an image from a recent speaking engagement. 2 weeks ago, I actually spoke virtually in Ukraine. I speak at all different types of settings. Again, every opportunity I'm grateful for. But more than, or in addition to being a author, researcher, and educator in this area, I also speak from personal experience. I'm just going to lightly touch on this because I shared a lot more about it yesterday at the Safe Passage Breakfast, which I believe that video is available through their website, or at least through their social media, to be able to find that if you have interest in hearing more. But I grew up in a home where partner abuse occurred. It wasn't physical or sexual abuse. It was, quote unquote, just emotional abuse. I think sometimes we undervalue the impact of emotional abuse, but I can say that, 25 years later, I still have nightmares. I still relive a couple moments in particular that were difficult to see. Again, I think it speaks to the reality that, I wasn't the direct target, at least at that time in my mind, of the emotional harm. It was my mom. But a lot of times when we live in homes where these things occur, we find ourselves wishing that we were the direct target, because it's harder it is harder to watch the ones we love go through things like that. And again, the emotional anguish associated with that. Shelby got me through everything. You see an image of me with him there. I credit that dog. He saved my life. He was my best friend. He was my comfort, my source of support. I often say he never spoke a word, but said everything I needed to hear when I needed to hear it most. As I would get older and struggle with suicide, at one point I thought I was ending my life. It was always his still, steady, constant encouragement and support that kind of talked me back down. I certainly wouldn't be here giving this talk if not for him, and I don't believe I would be alive today. Of anything I've accomplished, the thing I'm most proud of is not continuing that cycle of abuse to my own kids. There'll never be an accomplishment I'm more proud of. You see a picture, and again, I credit my relationship with my dog really to helping give me that blueprint for what healthy looks like. Kids who live in homes where family violence occurs, they have to, they may learn this normal that includes abuse and violence. And so if they're going to grow up and break that cycle and have a healthy and safe home of their own, They have to unlearn normal. And a lot of times pets can help us do that. Shelby certainly did for me. You see Will and I there for his 5th birthday. Here over the summer, we went and saw Paul McCartney. It was his first concert. I don't know how we're going to top that for his 2nd concert. He's talked about seeing Paw Patrol live. I don't know that it's going to quite live up to Paul McCartney. But again, as I said, anything that I talk about professionally, that my certainly the thing I'm most proud of is breaking that cycle and creating a safe environment for my own kids. I want to create change everywhere, and I think many of us do that are here today. But it's always important to remember that change everywhere first starts in your own home, and that's something that I certainly take very seriously. As I noted, family violence, I think of it as being the idea that essentially all are impacted in the home when any are targeted. I think we have to view these 3 as a team. And that being the adults, pets, and children in these homes. Again, if you want to protect or help any you see here, you have to help and protect all you see here. When it comes to partner abuse in particular, we know that children and pets are often in these homes. One study noted that at least in the home or the homes where partner abuse occurred in the study, 80% had 1 or more pets. Many of them had multiple pets and different types. And then one of my own studies here in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I'm located, I noted that when police respond to domestic violence, 59% of the time, there's at least 1 child in the home. So children and pets often in these homes. They may or may not be the direct target when it comes to partner abuse. Unfortunately, when we think of partner abuse, we know that perpetrators sometimes shift targets, right? And so if they feel they're losing control, if they feel the adult victim is about to report the abuse, they may begin to target others in the home. As I said, sometimes it's much worse to see those you're connected to and that you love hurt than to be hurt or the target yourself. So we do see that happen. But even if children and pets aren't the direct target, they're still certainly suffering. I believe that 100% of children who reside in homes where partner abuse occurs are harmed by it. Again, perps don't get to pick and choose who is harmed by their acts. They may pick a direct target and think that they're abusing that person, but they're actually harming and hurting all who reside within that home. We're going to focus on the child pet piece and what little time I have with you today. I know it's going to feel like a lot in a short period of time, but as often as I speak, I still give every talk as if it's my last, and then I'm going to give you, throw a lot at you today in a short period of time. I'm going to share some quotes from victims in these homes. It wasn't until I told him I was leaving that he began to target my children and cats. Again, something unfortunately that I've heard kind of repeated from others, this idea again of when perpetrators feel that they're maybe losing their grip, that the victim is either getting some sort of support and is looking at leaving or disclosing the abuse. Perps may then at that point begin to more actively target children and pets, often the most vulnerable beings, and obviously in the home and in the community. Again, kind of seeing that target shift. I think it just speaks to, again, the importance of understanding and viewing everyone we see here as a team, because even if they're not the direct target today, it doesn't mean they won't be tomorrow. Again, we often see those targets kind of shifting and moving around in these homes. He said if I left, it would be a death sentence for my beagle. My kids love that dog so much, and I knew he would kill it if I left. So I stayed for 5 more years. Just the heartbreaking reality when we don't include pets and family violence and planning or intervention, it becomes a major barrier for victims. They can't, leave that pet behind. I mean, and I kind of put myself in their shoes, and I was fortunate to have my dog. I can't imagine having to say goodbye, leaving that pet behind. There's something about it when these perpetrators threaten animal cruelty, it seems they almost always carry it out. Maybe even more so than other forms of family violence. And human victims in these homes know that it's not an idle threat. In this particular case, the adult victim said it was the 2nd time that the perpetrator put a gun in her throat in front of her kids, that she knew she had to go. She had to leave that pet behind because the local shelter didn't include animals in their intervention or in their program. She talked about being, the first night in that shelter, all she could do is think about that dog she had to leave behind. Her kids were very tightly connected to that animal, and we'll talk about that as we go on today and how that often happens, in my opinion and belief. And so she couldn't sleep that whole first night at shelter. So the next morning, she kind of snuck back and slipped away back to her house, and sure enough, the dog's body was actually laying out in the yard. Again, not an idle threat. When perps threaten it, they usually mean it, and victims know that. And so when we don't include pets in our intervention planning, we often, again, I mean, we're not going to reach the humans that are so tightly connected to them. The cats are completely different now that we have them. I remember how skittish they were in her home. It's as if they were absorbing the fear and stress my daughter was experiencing. Heartbreaking words of a father who lost 2 daughters in a double domestic violence homicide. The perp had realized that his ex-girlfriend had just ended the relationship, an abusive relationship. He learned that it was the sister who had kind of given her the courage to do so. They thought he had returned home, but he actually had laid in wait and ambushed both of them and killed them both. The father described, and I'll never forget the way he talked about the cats. He said, when we go and see my daughter, we would always joke about how the cats were acting. They were acting so odd and just so weird. He said we would, kind of laugh about it. They're not acting like we would expect cats to act. And now that I look back, I'm realizing that those cats were trying to tell me something. He said, now my wife and I have those cats and they act normal. They act as you would expect cats to act. I'm realizing now they were absorbing the fear and stress and harm that my daughter was probably experiencing in that home. And again, we see that often, right? I believe that to be true. Pets are also impacted when the humans they are connected to are harmed. Again, even if they're not the direct target, many form strong bonds with these humans, and it's a two-way street again. And so they're going to be harmed as well, and they may show that behaviorally in other ways too. Interestingly, I'm looking at one of my newest projects. I'm working with the animal control officer in Colorado, looking at the connection between dog bites and domestic violence, and finding that when there's a police report of a dog bite, often and a considerable or a significant proportion of the time, we also find a domestic violence report to that same home within a 1 to 3 year window of that dog bite report. So again, dogs may bite for other reasons too, but I think it's important to remember that sometimes these animals in these homes act out behaviorally, just as children and others do. Again, because of the harm and the things that they're witnessing and absorbing and experiencing. When we think about risks for children specifically in these homes, they're great and they're across the board. Every form of abuse, there's a risk for children when we're talking about partner abuse. So again, we think about even when children aren't the direct target, so to speak. It's not, that might be the case now, but it doesn't mean it's the case tomorrow. We know there's high risk of physical injury. Thinking of a specific instance where a mother, she was was a nurse at a hospital. She had left her son at home as she normally did at night. He was in his teens. I think he was around 14 or 15. She had just ended the relationship with the perpetrator like a day or two before. The perp knew that the child was going to be home alone. So according to the confession and police report, he went to the house knowing the kid would be there by himself. And what he described is saying, this is the only way your mom will learn. And then a severe physical assault of the child ended with a significant strangulation episode. The child survived, but with catastrophic injury. So again, physical risk for children we know is real too. When we think about sexual abuse, and I'll go ahead and note that since I've got it up there, percent with a visible injury, because I do think that's important to note as well. Think to yourself, and if we were in person, I'd put someone on the spot and ask you to answer, but you dodged a bullet here today because we're virtual, so I'll give the answer. But think to yourself, I talked about the risk for physical injury for kids is great in homes where partner abuse occurs. How often, what percent of the time, when law enforcement responds to domestic violence and there are children in the home, how often do you think the child presents with a clear, obvious physical, visible injury? So think to yourself, what percent of the time? One study in particular said it was 4% of the time. So only 4% of the time will law enforcement arrive and be able to easily see that there's a physical injury. Now, again, obviously the example I shared, it would be obvious, but again, only 4%. So I know many agencies use that as a determination of whether to involve child services or other programs. So if you're using that clear visible injury, you're missing 96% of the children who are harmed and at risk in these homes. Again, just because they weren't physically injured this time doesn't mean they won't be next time or that they weren't the time before. And we certainly know that the emotional harm is present for every child, in my belief, in these homes. Sexual abuse, again, risk for children in homes where partner abuse occurs kind of varies based on the parameters of the study, but the range is typically 33 to 70%. So even on the low end of that, and we're talking 1 in 3, again, high risk there. And emotional harm, like I said, I put it at 100%. I can't imagine a scenario where a child would live in a home where partner abuse is occurring and not be significantly emotionally harmed and impacted by it. We know that kids are aware of much more than caregivers even realize.
That's true. How's the line?
So I'm getting, is there any way to mute participants? Just asking Rich or Stephanie. I think we've got a couple mics on among participants. Starting to hear some talking that way. So hopefully we might be able to get those muted here in a second. If you are listening, and if you could mute your mic, if you're a participant listening, we're getting a couple, I think maybe a couple phone conversations going on here. When we look at the children and how they're impacted, we know they're often aware of much more than caregivers realize. Again, I can think back to my own experience and being able to, laying in bed as 12, 13, 14, being able to hear things through my parents' bedroom wall, hearing just the way that my dad would talk to my mom. And I just remember, again, just for a long time there, I felt bad for my mom. Then I began to feel scared for my mom as things, I can remember one time in particular where it seemed different. I ran up to the wall, was listening a little more, and I was worried about her safety. I ran to the bed and covered up and turned the light off as I heard my parents' bedroom door being flung open. Again, whoever looked in, and someone certainly did to see if I had heard, because again, this time it was worse than normal. Would have just thought I was asleep again, but I had heard it. And often that happens for kids in these homes. How do you think they're impacted emotionally by threats or harm to pets? And the answer, is significantly, obviously. When we think about how children are impacted when pets are threatened or harmed, I think we need to first think about what are some of the things that pets are providing? And so think back to pets you've had in the past, pets you have now. What are some of the things that those companion animals or non-human animals have provided for you? Just a kind of a short list here, but pets provide these things and often so much more for the humans they're connected to. And all of these things are critical for emotional health and well-being. And while pets, I believe, provide this for all humans, or at least most, how much more important are these things for victims of abuse? The reality is for kids in homes where partner abuse occurs, they're unlikely probably to form a strong, secure attachment to the perpetrator of abuse for a lot of different reasons that are evident in the literature. Their best chance probably at a secure attachment would be the victimized caregiver. The unfortunate reality is victims in these homes, adult victims, often have so much taken from them, particularly emotionally, that they have little sometimes left for their children. Again, it's just another layer of the abuse. It's certainly not what they want to do. They don't want to, it's not that they don't want to be there for them. They literally just have nothing left emotionally. And again, it often another layer of the trauma because they feel like they're failing. They feel like they're not doing enough, and things such as that. It's just another unfairness of when you're victimized by abuse. I think kids in that scenario form very strong bonds with these animals. Again, I know that to be the case in my situation. When I think it's important to note when perpetrators of abuse leave the home, especially if they're a biological parent of a child in that home, it's not so much that the harm stops as that it changes. And so even if the perp isn't physically there in the home, they're still going to find ways, particularly thinking financial, thinking emotional harm, to continue that harm. It's not so much that it gets necessarily easier, though it is in some ways, but it just continues. It's just different. And again, pets provide often a constant for these kids. I know my dog did for me. Again, that is so critical to their emotional health and well-being. You look at that list and you see those things. And again, having that pet that can provide that for you, certainly not a permanent fix, but can certainly help you and get you through some really rough periods in your life. I know many people, I'm not even just talking about abuse, but talking about medical conditions, talking about things such as that describe how pets and animals really provided life-saving support as they dealt with many of those difficult things. In a single word, pets are family. There was one, I've seen multiple surveys, but I can think of one in particular that said 95% of Americans consider pets to be part of the family. I don't know what was wrong with the other 5%. I don't know if they were having a bad day. If they didn't understand the question, I probably would have asked them again. But most Americans consider pets to be part of the family. But again, we often see them excluded from family violence planning, and it's a huge oversight. Sometimes, again, when I'm doing this work and talking about these things, I'll say, you know, because there is difficulty. I'll note that when you include pets in the process, we know humans have, you know, some humans have allergies to pets. Some of these pets can act out behaviorally, as I described earlier. A lot of times that's kind of a byproduct of the abuse that they either are the target of or that they witness. But again, it's worth it to figure it out, because it's not so much about picking pets over people, as some people have told me, but the understanding that there's some people that you will never get to shelter if you don't include their pets in the process. They come as a pair. It's a human pet pair. It's a tight and strong emotional bond. And if you don't include pets, you're not going to get the humans connected to them there either. I think I'll probably skip actually this slide again for time. You're going to see me skip some things. The point I want to make, I can make with this slide here. And that is, you know, we think about what pets provide for the humans, particularly in these homes that are experiencing abuse. And if we think of it as in that light, that maybe perps are targeting animals. Again, we know often they're the most vulnerable beings in the community, but also, you know, animals are working in the opposite direction of perpetrators of abuse. Perpetrators want victims to feel isolated, to feel that they have no support, that they have no hope, that there's no chance of a brighter or better day. Animals often work in the other direction. They're providing comfort, they're providing support, they're allowing that victim to feel like someone cares, someone listens. I can remember one child in particular, or he's now an adult, but describing being a child, and he would just be so excited to get off the school bus and run to their cow, just tell their cow about his day. He said that was the one being that I had, the one being who understood me, who listened to me. So again, if perps notice that animals are providing support and our encouragement, again, an animal in any form, I think, would be at risk then of the perpetrator, you know, taking some sort of action against them. So it's not just dogs and cats is what I'm saying, but we think of other types of animals too. You can look at, you know, different, obviously in a more rural environment. And I hear that I can think of one case in particular where the perpetrator had known that his ex-wife, who the perpetrator had left the home, his ex-wife had found comfort and solace in her horses. And there was actually, he had actually returned and shot and killed 2 of them. Again, not just dogs and cats, any type of animal in any form that these victims are finding support from or encouragement from could technically become a target, you know, really at any moment, especially, as I said, if a victim is considering ending the relationship or does report the abuse or end the relationship. Kind of tying everything together a bit that we've talked about so far. As I said, this time's going to go quick. I'm going to cover as much as I can, but we'll get through, or the time will pass quickly. So I'm going to talk for about 10 more minutes or so, maybe 12, and then I'll stop and see if we have any questions, and then wrap up and to make sure we're done on time. Obviously, children significantly impacted by the things I've described today. Pets can be their sole source of support. I've got a picture here of a stuffed animal. It's not the exact one, but it reminds me of the one from a case file where the child, so the partner abuse was occurring in the home. As part of the partner abuse, the perpetrator actually killed the family pet, which was a German Shepherd. The child was very tightly connected to it. Again, as I said, children often are. My most recent study, and I don't know if I'll try to make sure we have time to get to that today, but I title it The Intertwined Well-Being of Children and Pets in These Homes. And I think it's often the case that the two are so tightly connected. I think it's hard to separate the well-being of either. But in this particular case, the dog had been killed. The child began to revert back to a stuffed animal from youth or from childhood, or younger childhood, that he had found comfort in. And so the perpetrator began to cut the arms off, cut the legs off, cut the ears off of this stuffed animal. Again, as I said, whether it's a real animal, stuffed animal, sometimes perpetrators use these acts, again, to try to squash any kind of hope. In fact, I think they often do it for that reason. And just heartbreaking, obviously, for these families to see it and to experience it. When pet abuse and animal cruelty, particularly in this context, the context of partner abuse, occurs in the home, if there's children that live there, they're probably going to see it, right? I can think of many instances where perps actually went out of their way to make sure that the children had to watch it. I think you have one incident in particular where the perpetrator actually restrained a child to a chair, killed the family pet in front of the child, and then actually turned the light switch off and left the child in the room with the body of the animal for several hours in the dark. Again, I think often these acts are intended to just squash any hope. And so the perps want them to be as harmful and hurtful as possible. They want human victims to know, what may happen to them if they were to report what's going on in the home or take any kind of action. Unfortunately, when children see these acts, again, they're at high risk of beginning to perpetrate animal cruelty themselves. It kind of gets back to the idea I mentioned a little bit earlier of this normal, right? When you're a child and you're seeing and witnessing these things, you're so dependent on your caregivers to help you define what normal should look like. And so when normal is abusive, when it's unhealthy, we see children again at being at great risk of going on and accepting that normal and continuing it in their own life. Excuse me. I'm going to skip some of these examples because I've shared them or something similar to them already. I want to talk next about a study that was actually originally published, I think in 2018, was just assigned an issue number last year, so it becomes a 2021 study. It's actually or at least it was last I checked, the most shared study ever published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. And for it, I was trying to quantify risk in these homes. So quantify risk in homes where partner abuse and pet abuse co-occur, to look at risk for the entire family. Again, we view it as a unit. And so obviously if partners and pets are being targeted, and then that obviously that third party, the child, certainly is being significantly harmed and probably at risk too. Sorry, get a drink of water. So what I did for this particular study is look at specific characteristics of the intimate partner violence that was being reported in the home. These were all, so I utilized police reports to do this. So these were all homes where the partner violence or partner abuse was reported to law enforcement. Estimates are that only 1 in 4 victims of physical and sexual abuse. And obviously we know emotional abuse is domestic violence as well. But even just looking at physical and sexual abuse, estimates are that only 1 in 4 ever get reported to law enforcement. So again, this is among the examples that do. Just looking at rape in general, among what was reported by IPV victims, 8% in general jumps all the way up to 26%, just knowing one thing. And that is that the suspect also has a history of harming pets. So pet abusing, partner abusers. Again, rate of rape more than triples. Looking at strangulation, again, something we're very concerned about. We know that victims can die in an instant from strangulation. We also know there can be death as long as 48 hours in terms of from swelling and things such as that, 48 hours after the strangulation of event. We also know that it's often identified as a major warning sign or red flag for the potential for domestic violence homicide, a major risk factor for that. So we're obviously many reasons to be worried about strangulation. Also, the idea of it hands-on is very concerning in terms of looking at how, if the victim doesn't die from the act, again, risk is going to exponentially increase in the home. 47% just in general, which was kind of alarming. I mean, I think national estimates at the time of the study were that 10 to 33% of partner abusers of physical or sexual abuse strangled victims. The study here in Indianapolis already had it at 47% just in general, concerning, as I said, but jumps all the way up to 76% if we just know one thing. At least for this particular study, I couldn't note any single characteristic that seemed to raise risk across the board than that history of animal abuse. So it's always a question I tell anyone who's working with domestic violence victims, whether you're at a shelter, whether you're law enforcement, when you're gathering information, collecting information about what's going on in the home, I would certainly want to know if the partner abuser also harms pets, because again, just hearing that, at least from this study and from other studies that are out there, I think there's good reason to be even more concerned. Now, we're already concerned just that partner abuse is occurring. We know everyone in the home is at risk. But again, adding that extra layer, it's partner abuse and pet abuse, just seems to exponentially increase risk for all different types of characteristics, everything I explored in this study. I'll skip this one again just for sake of time, but I'll show one characteristic here looking at emotional abuse, and that is living with a daily fear you will be killed. Now, this is another important one because when we think about PTSD symptomology, we know that the most severe symptoms of PTSD are tied to the chronicity or the duration that one fears for one's life. You know, we see this when we think of the military, you know, returning from home, returning from a war or from a battle. We think of PTSD symptomology, right? When they come back home, reliving these events, things such as that. The reality is the human brain doesn't really care where you experience the trauma and stress. So, you know, if you're fighting in a war zone overseas, or if the war zone is in your living room, your brain and your body still reacts the same way. So we can see victims of abuse, particularly when we're thinking about the emotional underlying harm, you know, experiencing that same PTSD symptomology. 35% in general, jumps all the way up to nearly 80%, 78% of these victims live with literally daily fear they will be killed. I think this also extends to this particular characteristic just looks at the adult victims, saying they live with daily fear. But what about kids in these homes too, right? That probably are fearing for the well-being of their parents, of their pets. They live with that same daily fear too. Even if they're not necessarily fearing they will be killed, they're probably living with fear that someone they love and are connected to will be killed. And again, our brains really make no differentiation where and why that stress happens. It's just the fact that it happens, that process of feeling those stress and those harmful emotions, again, that can wreak havoc on our body systems and leave these victims with just a lifelong struggle, just overcoming some of these physiological effects of experiencing this type of fear on a daily basis. Another thing that came from this study that I think is interesting and relevant to what we're talking about today is the development of a timeline. So I looked at, for the study, the initial study, the PET piece was the follow-up study. But for the initial study, I looked at 9,355 police reports of domestic violence and kind of started to develop kind of a timeline of examples of what that may look like. Doesn't always follow this pattern, but kind of based on what I was seeing, it's the pattern I came up with. Interestingly, when victims did report, as I said, only 1 in 4 do. But when victims, and that was pre-pandemic, so I'm not sure how the pandemic will change that. But when victims do report partner abuse, they usually report it on about the 10th incident. So again, if law enforcement is responding to a call for domestic violence, it means at least 10 incidents have already occurred. So again, that's why I say if you get there and a child doesn't have a clear visible injury, you know, well, it doesn't mean they weren't injured on the 8th incident or the 6th or the 4th, or that they won't be on the 11th. So it's always important to remember that, in my opinion. I already noted how I think partner abusers, and we see it in the literature and we see examples of it too, how partner abusers will use animal cruelty to delay that report. What was interesting when I looked at this timeline and I looked at it for this study, on average, again, victims experience 10 incidents before they call. If the partner abuser also has a known history of abusing animals, victims will wait to make that first call until they've experienced 20 to 50 incidents. So we're already worried about 10, but again, if we know pet abuse is a piece, then all of those patterns, all of those systems are just much further along. I kind of refer to it as a period of critical delay, where again, I think partner abusers are using threats or perpetrated harm to animals. They may even begin to target children in the home. Again, that they're starting to get this sense that the victim is about to report. And so what are they going to do? They're going to change up the game. And so I think obviously children and pets are always at great risk in these homes, but I think they're at extreme risk during this period of critical delay. So again, after that 10th incident, when again, perps are probably targeting others in the home, that's where I talked about a shifting target and why we have to view all of these family units as every member being at risk and harmed. Again, imagine a child witnessing 20 to 50 incidents or even being the target of some of those. That process is well on the way before we ever get that first 911 call. You know, I think we hear it so often that a family has a history of domestic violence, but again, important to note, we're not usually just talking about a single incident, but rather often a prolonged period of many incidents of harm. We know the adult victims, according to literature, are at their highest risk when they seek shelter, when they report the abuse. Again, I consider pets and children probably at their highest risk when a victim is just starting to think through those things. Some studies have indicated that it takes a domestic violence victim 7 attempts to actually finally end a relationship. So again, it's during that process. Again, I think risk is so high for children and pets. This bond is critical in these homes, and I'm only going to speak for a few minutes, and then I'm going to stop, see if there's any questions, and then I'll continue. So I'm gonna kind of try to wrap things up as quickly as I can here in the next 5 minutes, because after questions, I want to talk about some intervention ideas and things such as that. I think I try to paint a very realistic picture, but it's also hard to think about. But the last thing I want to do is say, here's all this, now good luck. I also want to wrap up with some ideas of some things we can do to help and support these families. This is a big one, protecting the child-pet bond. It's so important. As I said, Shelby's support and love for me was life-saving. I talked about it more at the breakfast yesterday, but certainly without the love and support of my dog, I would not be here today. I'm going to skip some slides here again, just for sake of time. Again, as I said, though, when children form these strong bonds with these pets, it's not for forever, unfortunately. It can get us through a difficult time, but again, it's not permanent. I recently found some of these pictures from my final days with Shelby. This is probably about a year, I think, before I lost him. He literally just, his legs gave out on a walk from old age. But I can look in my eyes there, and I know the suicidal thoughts that were going on. You see, I had depended so much on Shelby, and Shelby was everything, that I had no backup plan. When people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? For a long time there, I was just saying, it doesn't matter, because I didn't believe it did. I didn't think I'd be here to see it. Many times struggling with suicidal thoughts, and particularly when I lost that dog, it felt like a piece of my soul had just been wrenched from me. And I, again, risk for suicide really spiked there. I went into a really deep depression. I can remember some days there soon after I lost Shelby, I would literally, I lived alone, and I would literally get home from work and just fall asleep on the floor there in the kitchen. I remember one day in particular, I didn't even feel like, I was taking my shoes off. I didn't even feel like doing that. I literally just lay, I mean, it was bad, and it was really dark. And so I think it's important to note that for kids, when they form these strong bonds, it's not permanent. And so if we're working with these families, we understand that if they lose that bond and that critical relationship, whether it be through an act of animal cruelty or from natural causes, we need to be very worried about them, and understanding that it's a time when they're probably going to be struggling emotionally, and certainly in need of our support. I talked a little bit about this, and for sake of time, I'm not going to get a whole lot into it. It's my newest study, and I looked at just the well-being of children and non-human animals in these homes, and how it's so tightly connected together. I'll just give you a quick statement about it, just looking at this chart here. So what I did is I looked at when children were involved in animal or reports to animal control, and that is involved as perpetrator, involved as a witness or reporter, or involved in a cross services report. So when child services and animal welfare were both involved. And what I noted, obviously concern when children were committing the acts of animal cruelty. I also noted concern for kids when they were reporting, because when it was a companion animal, they always knew the perp. And again, if the perp learned that the child had made the report, I would think the child would be at risk. And anytime there was a cross services report, it seemed that the child and pet shared the same outcome. So if a pet was suffering neglect, the child was too. If a pet was suffering abuse, the child was too. If a pet was found wandering the neighborhood, well, there was a report of a child also getting out of that home and wandering the neighborhood. I took away from the study, and again, in a quick hitting version of it, all my studies are available for free on my organization's website. Again, just the idea that it's so interconnected. When animals are at risk or being harmed, we're very concerned about children in these homes as well. And when, obviously children are being harmed, we're worried about the animals as well. There's certainly a crossover there, and something that was very evident throughout the course of doing that and writing and in every aspect of that research study to me. Again, as I said, for sake of time, I won't get into it, but I also shared actual case narratives from those reports in that study, if you have interest. I've talked a lot about what it looks like when the child animal relationship is protected. Unfortunately, conversely, when it's not protected, when we see children go on to commit these acts of animal abuse, we have to pay close attention. Again, an unfortunate indicator that when children are committing acts of abuse, they are at great risk if we don't effectively intervene. to go on and commit acts of abuse in the home, in the community, and also in the classroom. We see this, played out when we look at histories of serial killers. We know that many serial killers have a history of animal cruelty. Again, very concerning when we're seeing those types of behaviors happen. We also see it among school shooters and perpetrators of mass shootings. I'll share the National Link Coalition there. Great newsletter and great resources through their website, something I definitely would recommend checking out and exploring some of the links of many of the things that I'm describing today. And I know Phil is actually doing a breakout session here too after this session. But even in some of the recent incidents, I'll share there. I think I can share it now because it has been finalized. But you see the Buffalo, New York mention, the community actually where the perpetrator of that shooting resided is holding a day-long summit next year, talking about mass shootings and the impact family violence can play in that. And I just recently accepted the opportunity to go out there and be a part of that. Which I think will be an important conversation. And I think, again, a good response to start thinking about and understanding how family violence even links to acts of mass murder. We know in that particular case that there was this history of animal cruelty too in the perpetrator. We're seeing more studies too tying domestic violence also in histories of perpetrators of mass shootings. So again, many of the things we're talking about today, I talk about risk for those in the home. But that risk extends really to the surrounding community. I often say, if you want to know how bad violence will be in your community in about 5 to 10 years, look at how bad family violence is in your community right now. Again, these issues may start in the home, but they don't often stay there. They if we choose to ignore them now, and consider it, well, it's a problem for that home to deal with. Well, it will certainly become your problem soon. Again, these issues and things affect everyone. They may start in the home, but they don't stay there. I want to go ahead and stop there and see if I have any questions. Again, I've only got about 8 minutes left, so I'll see if I can check the chat here and see, and then I'm going to finish in these last few minutes. Might just answer 1 or 2 questions for sake of time.
I have a question, Andrew.
Yes.
I'm a board member, and 2 of us as board members, Greg Gardner and myself, started looking into this terrible topic. And over a period of months, it became pretty overwhelming. I'm glad you said you're going to address some of the things we can do, but we absolutely got stuck because there was so much out there and the topic is so massive that we really weren't, wanted to know the best first step. I know there are probably many, but if you could shrink the approaches a bit and help us to figure out how to go forward from this, we would appreciate this.
Absolutely. So certainly I would, if you don't mind emailing me, and I can give you a much, I think a much better response in terms of just for sake of time. But I so appreciate your attention to this. I can say, just thinking of it again, thinking of a major issue and trying to shrink it down to a short response. We know that keeping these family units together is important. So for children, again, they're going to have strong bonds if the relationship is healthy with these pets. So if a child's going into a foster system, if a child's being removed from the home environment, maintaining contact with their pet when possible is ideal if it's a healthy relationship. But also I encourage even just looking at relationships with other animals too can be helpful. Again, we want to ensure that the relationship is a healthy one and the child's not harming the animal. But we think about the courtroom setting. I remember one judge saying, sometimes, when a child is testifying about, awful, horrific things, just seeing a dog in the courtroom can sometimes provide that comfort. Sometimes they just need to see it. Sometimes it needs to be sitting there and they can pet the dog and we can actually see the child, relax a bit and be able to talk about these difficult things. I can think of one instance in particular, again, of a foster parent that was describing a very difficult situation with a child. She said, this child came from an abusive home environment. We really, wanted to work, but it's just not working. But after, hearing your presentation, I realized, the only positive thing that child ever talks about is that dog that was in his home. and we don't have any pets. And so, you know, in this case, what I said, and I think we always have to be careful, right? Because we want to make sure it's a healthy interaction between child and animal. You know, what I recommended in this particular case was to reach out to animal shelters in your area. A lot of times they need volunteers to walk animals, to spend time with animals. And again, so a kind of a way to go both directions and help both ways. And that foster parent reached back out to me and said, you know, it worked. She said, you know, we started going to this local shelter. I was right there with him and observing the relationship. And, you know, this child, it went from what felt like an impossible foster situation to now this child's completely different. Like, he trusts us, he's opening up with us, like this totally saved, you know, the direction of this relationship. So again, now that's when it's healthy. When it's not healthy, again, we have to take it seriously and get involved. Again, for sake of time, I'll just share that I know the Animal Welfare Institute, AWI, that they have some great resources on and some ideas and concepts on working with children who are committing these acts. And again, we want them to stop doing it and learn a healthy normal. So I would share that when it goes the other direction. Animal Welfare Institute has great resources there. National Link Coalition also has some good ones. But for sake of time, I'll probably have to leave it at that, but certainly email me and I can provide some additional information. I did promise that we would talk about some, again, organizations and ways to help. So I want to get to that next. I'll just share this.
And
yes.
you mentioned that there's a question, a good question that you have time. I think we can probably run a couple because we've got a break time. So
okay.
There's a good question in the chat box and a comment. If you
yes.
could respond to one more.
I absolutely can. Do you want to read that to me or do you want me to?
Yeah, let's see if I can see it. Okay. Can you speak? No, I'm sorry. I've got two in there. I didn't see the one. So the one that I was looking at says, how knowledgeable are police in recognizing and understanding new child and pet abuse? Are they trained to spot possible dangers in these? Or do they have to wait for a definite crime? Violence?
So how well trained are they? It certainly varies from community to community, just from my own experience. It's certainly something they need to pay attention to. I actually wrote this paper last year that actually explored the, you know, we talked about increased risk for the family and community when pet abuse and partner abuse are co-occurring. That risk in my paper and estimation also extends to officers. Looking at, again, domestic violence perpetrators versus domestic violence perpetrators with animal cruelty. We know that DV perps with animal cruelty are, at least in this paper and from the study information I had gathered that the paper's based on, that perps were more likely to have a gun, to have used a weapon against a partner, to have a history of substance abuse or mental illness, and to have a history of suicidal threats or attempts, again, if they had that history of animal cruelty. So in as much as risk is a, you know, increased for families, it's also appears to be increased for responders. I'll note that all those characteristics I just mentioned are commonly reflected when you look at the history of perpetrators of or individuals who shoot and kill law enforcement when responding to domestic violence. We know domestic violence in terms of a single type of incident, it's the most dangerous incident that police officers respond to. And again, looking at the characteristics that are present among individuals who do shoot and kill police officers, all of those things across the board seem to be increased in terms of prevalence when we know the DV perp also harms animals. So I think I'm trying to use that in working with police officers and helping them to understand the risk extends to them as well. I also am encouraging them to use, you know, the other agencies that are in their community. If you have an animal control agency, if you have a child welfare agency, which, you know, you would hope that both of those are in your community, you get to a scene, you know, don't trust your own ability to make some of those determinations. But if you feel something's off, if something looks off, if again, if we're seeing a risk to or harm to an animal, the child's at risk, and thinking about involving some of those agencies that are trained to detect, again, can save lives. And what I often say to police officers is, you know, when you think about the lives you save by making those cross-discipline reports, you know, sometimes that life that's saved might even be your own when we consider the risk to them when responding. What was, you said there was one more question, Rich? I'll see if I can find that question. I think we had one more. Let's see. Someone asked, I wonder what percentage of this is related to parents on substance abuse. Good question. Again, when I look at the information, as I said, I just kind of can actually probably just have the slide that I just shared, since we had a question about it. But as I said, looking among perpetrators of domestic violence, this was from another one of my papers. There you see on the left, 47% had a history of mental illness or substance abuse. Just knowing the one thing, that they also harm animals in the home, jumps that rate all the way up to 74%. So again, I think, yes, it may often play a factor. I'll answer one more question.
Yeah,
Can
and I'm sorry, I was muted, but it says,
No,
can you
you're good.
speak? I was before, I read this one, but I was muted. Can you speak to perpetrators interfering in the relationship between non-abusive parent and child to isolate both, even though they're living in the same home?
In a relationship between non-abusive parent and child, isolate both. Oh yeah, certainly. I think it happens all the time, unfortunately. You know, I can speak to my own personal experience sometimes and how it felt. You know, I think, I mean, it's a pretty, it's a topic I could talk on probably for an hour about just on its own. I think perps, again, are very opportunistic. They want to create as much harm as possible. Children and pets are very vulnerable. They're, you know, they should be able to trust these individuals as a caregiver, someone who's looking out for their best interests. And so it becomes very confusing and hard for them as a child to detect when that's not happening, right? And it can be subtle, but I think it's certainly something that happens. I can think back to my own experiences, and I think to every conversation that I can ever remember my dad having about my mom, it was always with hate, it was with anger, it was that she was poisoning me. You know, conversely, my mom has even still, it's hard to even remember a single time where she said anything negative about my dad. Everything that I talk about, everything that I describe is from my own personal memories. It's from my own perceptions. Not once did my mom ever say anything negative, but the converse, you know, was true for my dad. It was always hate. It was always anger. It was always telling me that, you know, my mom was poisoning my mind or thinking you're doing these things. Even as an adult, I still have, even in the last 5 years, gotten a letter that said the same thing. So again, I think it often happens, right? And so sometimes you're a child, is so confusing and it's so difficult to weed through it all and sort it out. I can remember even then, like in those teen years, it's just so hard. We're dependent on outside organizations to be able to help us in those situations, because as a child, it's just too hard. You can't figure it out. So we're dependent on other agencies to be able to, when we know these types of things are occurring, to act appropriately in a way that protects these children. Because, you know, even if they wanted to, they often, you know, like I said, they rarely have a voice. And even when they do have a voice, it's going to be hard to put it all together in your head. You know, many people, it takes until they're adults and even long into adulthood before they're able to even fully understand and recognize the things that happen as a child. But certainly something I think that occurs frequently. For sake of time, I just want to share, since I had promised at least, because I want to finish this on time. But you know, many of the things I've described there, at least close as we can, that I've described today, hang on the idea of animal welfare and human welfare working better together. The reality is, you know, it's not a novel approach, but rather a return to our roots. You may or may not be aware that organized animal welfare efforts actually predated those organized efforts to protect children here in the U.S. by about 8 years. But even at the beginning, you know, when Etta Wheeler was concerned and reached out about one child in particular there in New York, and reached out to Henry Berg, knowing his success recently in protecting animals, you know, even from the very beginning, these efforts were intertwined and they were connected, just as the children and pets' lives and well-beings are. Over time, we've separated, but it's certainly time to renew and revisit these types of concepts. Again, for sake of time, you'll see me skip some of this. I know Shelby's support for me was life-saving. So again, when I'm thinking about how can you be effective in intervening, you have to find ways whenever possible to keep pets safe too. I'm thinking of a lot of good organizations out there, such as Red Rover, Sheltering Animals and Families Together. I just recently became aware of a new one. I met, when I was speaking in Kansas City, Missouri, a couple of weeks ago, I met one of the co-founders of Besty, BESTY, BNB. That's kind of a new resource that started there, I think, in the Missouri, Kansas area, that's now extending across the country to help with fostering networks and setting up, again, safe places and safe havens for pets to go. You can go to the Animal Welfare Institute's Safe Havens mapping project and see in your own community what are opportunities or what agencies help with including pets in the process. Again, it's critical. An international study noted that among pet owning victims of domestic violence, they said the one thing that would help them to end the relationship the most would be having a safe place to take their pets. I mean, it's critical. And so again, when it comes to what can we do to help, include animal control, include animal welfare in your efforts. They deserve a seat at the table when you're talking about these issues, because again, if you want to best serve your community, you're going to include the animals too. And so finding ways, again, to protect these pets too, it is critical. Kids are so tightly connected to them. And again, when we allow the pet to be a part of the process, they can be critical in the healing process. They can provide life-saving, life-changing support, and change everything. You know, I talked about yesterday at the breakfast, I was so worried about having kids myself, because I just feared I would hurt them like I had been hurt by my father. I thought, you know, you can't be a good dad if you don't have a blueprint for what that's supposed to look like. But then I realized, no, I did have a blueprint, you know, and it was that relationship with Shelby. And I pull from that daily. And really, as I said, it's not only life-saving in the moment, but literally it can totally change the course of these children's lives. One study in particular looks at the effects of emotional maltreatment, long-term effects. And it noted that among survivors, children said, you know, as adults looking back in their childhood, having one person show unconditional positive regard. Sounds simple, but it's literally so critical for these kids. For me, it was this dog here. And I think for many kids, it is their pet, and it could be if we included pets in this process. But again, think to that, just that unconditional positive regard. It's so critical in surviving these types of things, and it has to be a part of the process. I wrote a book that Rich described. I'll go ahead and skip over that, but about that describes, or that goes more into this about looking out pets and how important they are to victims of abuse. But want to go ahead and finish. Again, as I said, I know it was a lot, but that's how I treat every presentation. I always bring more than I can get through. Better to have, you know, fill every second than have empty space. So I appreciate your time and attention today. Everything, my full slide deck is available. If you have interest in that, I can send it to you. And certainly if you have any additional questions, I'm not going anywhere, so I'll be here. But you can also email those. I know sometimes the questions in this area can be sensitive, so if you're more comfortable emailing, please do so. But again, thank you for your time, attention, and the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Thank you, Andrew. And I just want to mention that Anna Marie's Alliance is doing a breakout session today, and they do exactly what you're talking about. So just so you're aware. And Stephanie, do you want to give instructions, or where are we then with the process?
And I know my understanding is, I believe, and I'm sorry, I think I was supposed to say that. I'll go ahead and add that. So I think that everyone, you get like a short break now, and then the breakout sessions are going to start, it looks like in about 8 minutes or so, 8 to 10 minutes, I think, right at about 15 after. So is that correct, Rich?
That's what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah. So you will automatically be sent to the breakout section that you selected. Yep. Start about 10:15.
So stay here, and then you'll see it. Yeah, it'll automatically shift, and you'll be sent to whatever breakout room you've been that you signed up for. Well,
thank you so much, Andrew. I'll just I want to say that Andrew's very responsive. So if you have questions or things you want to know, we'll leave this up, I hope, for a minute so that you can get his email address, or just email me and I'll send it to you.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you to all of you again.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Rich, can you hear me?
Yes, Phil?
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I'm on 10:15 your time, 11:15 my time. Just want to check, make sure we're on.
Yep, we're on, and people will be sent directly to your breakout session at about that time. So
okay.
Just leave things where they are, and it should be automatically if we trust in Zoom. So, and I'll be there to, so I'll know whether or not it's working.
Sounds good. Andrew, great job.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Great to see you as always.
As always.
And again, for everyone, if your Zoom doesn't automatically send you to the breakout room that you registered for, it will give you the option to choose your breakout room. So you can just click into that. You'll have a little prompt on your screen. Just send me a message, Stephanie, in the chat box if you have any concerns or questions about that.
Andrew, are you part of the workshop we're doing in the virtual workshop for Indiana social workers on the 26th?
I am, yes. I
Okay,
saw you
good.
were presenting that day as well. Yep,
Okay, we'll tag team there too.
sounds
Okay.
great. Great to see you, by the way, Phil. Good to see you.
Likewise. Stay safe.
You as well.